In my last video, I talked about a segment of Game Informer's 123 rapid-fire questions interview with Anthem executive producer Mark Darrah. Pretty good interview overall, with tidbits of new information and funny quips. But one thing that surprised me was that Mass Effect Andromeda came up, with the interviewer asking Mark if he thought that the game got a fair shot, referring to its underwhelming critical and commercial performance, to which Mark responded as follows.
Do you think Mass Effect Andromeda got a fair shake?
No.
Why not?
I think it came out in a really, really busy window of RPGs, perhaps the busiest window in the history of the games industry, where 5 RPGs launched in the same month.
Can you shorten that up at all?
How about it came out the same month as Zelda?
Now, I personally took issue with this response, as not only was the window during which Andromeda launched not one of the busiest for RPGs in the history of games as he claimed, with Mass Effect Andromeda actually being uniquely positioned during that time period as a sequel to a highly popular sci-fi narrative-driven role-playing game series. I thought it was silly for him to say that Andromeda didn't get a fair shot because it was overshadowed by superior games like Zelda. I argued back by stating that Andromeda did get a fair shot, but it was BioWare and EA who dropped the ball. Zelda didn't steal Andromeda's thunder, the studio and publisher did that themselves when they decided to rush a half-baked product to launch. It wasn't other games' fault that Andromeda released in such an unacceptable state by Mass Effect standards. That was all on BioWare and EA. And the ensuing backlash and mockery regarding facial animations and the god-awful dialogue and writing was what ultimately killed the game's chances of success, for which BioWare and EA are solely responsible for. Now, word about Mark Darrah's latest statement on Andromeda has seemingly been getting around, as Mark took to Twitter to extrapolate further on what he meant when he said that Andromeda did not get a fair shake. He said, quote, "I'm going to regret this in half an hour, but let's talk, did Mass Effect Andromeda get a fair shake? First off, the question was not, is Mass Effect Andromeda secretly a great game and did me Nintendo make us fail? Mass Effect Andromeda is a deeply flawed game, especially at launch, but the review environment was crowded. Nier, Neo, Horizon, and Zelda all launched in Mass Effect Andromeda's window. Each does something better than Mass Effect Andromeda, again, a flawed game. As a result, even systems that are pretty decent get scrutinized against superiorly implemented ones. Does launching in a different window turn 72% into 90? Certainly not. 72 into 77 or 78? Maybe. Does that affect sales? Some, but word of mouth matters so much these days. And here's the thing, that's the nature of the industry. You don't have full control over when you launch and no control over when others do. Dragon Age Inquisition benefited by how tough a year 2014 turned out to be for games. You launch the best game you can. Mass Effect Andromeda has a lot of problems and got lapped by genuinely better games. I do appreciate that Mark actually took the time to directly respond to community feedback and extrapolate on where he was coming from. It's not every day we see a developer who is so openly communicative as Mark is, who has also been responding to just about every Anthem-related question tweeted his way. With that said, about his response, while it's good that he's admitting that Andromeda was a deeply flawed game, while I do agree that Andromeda's launch window was a relatively busy one in terms of review environment, while I won't deny that these factors might have had some effect on sales and review scores, I don't understand why any of this means Andromeda didn't get a fair shake. It was unfair for every game. It's not as if Andromeda was the only game afflicted by a busy window. Plenty of other games, many less known than Mass Effect, had to fight for their spot as well. And had Andromeda garnered overwhelmingly favorable reviews, it probably would have performed just as well, if not better, than some of these other titles. Granted, Mark isn't saying that Andromeda's issues didn't have anything to do with its underwhelming sales performance. As a matter of fact, he straight up admits that other games that launched in Andromeda's window did something better. But at the same time, he is arguing that Andromeda was overly criticized because there were so many other games that cumulatively made a decent Andromeda look way worse than it really was. He's arguing that perception was skewed. Think of it this way, if I asked you how attractive I was from a scale from 1 to 10, looking at me by myself might yield a better score than if I were standing next to Jason Momoa. He's basically arguing that had Andromeda released in a month without Jason Momoa level games, it would have been looked at more fairly, that perception wouldn't have been so skewed. Personally speaking, my disdain for Andromeda's lackluster quality has nothing to do with how much I enjoyed other games. I viewed Andromeda as its own unique experience, which wasn't hard to do considering it was a uniquely positioned game that's nothing like Nier, Neo, Horizon, Zelda, and other high-profile games released near that window. The only thing that skewed my perception in some way was my high expectations for a brand new Mass Effect game, a brand new entry in this beloved series. And while Andromeda wasn't unplayable or atrocious, it certainly did not live up to standards one would come to expect from BioWare. This is certainly not what I waited 5 years for. Mark says that Andromeda might have garnered a Metascore in the high 70s had it released in a less busy review environment, but the thing is, even then, Mass Effect isn't a high 70s kind of game series. When it comes to BioWare, when it comes to Mass Effect, when it comes to the bar they've set in the past, the expectation was that Andromeda should have been a 90 or above. It's the same expectation for other renowned game franchises like, say, Zelda. Excellence is expected. The difference between the two, Breath of the Wild managed to deliver on Zelda's reputation, whereas Andromeda woefully fell short of Mass Effect standards. And sorry if such expectations seem unfair, but that's just kind of what you sign up for when you decide to make a sequel to a beloved, highly renowned franchise. Now, I do get the sense that part of what Mark found unfair about Andromeda's circumstances was the fact that it was rushed to release by elements that were out of BioWare's control. One excerpt from his tweets reads, "You don't have full control over when you launch and no control over when others do." Furthermore, when one Twitter user argued that BioWare would have delayed Andromeda's launch if they really cared about word of mouth, Mark responded, "Sometimes that isn't an option." I will give BioWare this, if it were completely up to them, they probably would have delayed the game and polished it up a hell lot more before launch. But of course, EA being EA, they wouldn't budge on delaying Andromeda, resorting instead to rushing the game out in order to adhere to their quarterly financial schedule for their investors and whatnot, because, as we all know, the publisher's real customers aren't gamers, it's the investors. To be fair though, BioWare, you did have 5 years to make this game, and you did play a part in factors such as indecisive leadership, ill-conceived ideas that were scrapped too late, in-office politics, technical difficulties with the Frostbite engine, and managerial incompetence that ultimately led to Andromeda's troubled development history, if Kotaku editor Jason Schreier's investigative report is to be believed. Yes, a delay on EA's part would have probably gone a long way, but from what we know, it's not as if BioWare didn't make its fair share of questionable decisions or doesn't have any blame to bear. So with all due respect to Mark Dara, while you're not entirely wrong about some of the things you said and tweeted about, none of this is really unfair, it's just unfortunate. These are just one man's thoughts and opinions anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on all of this in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content and would like to support this channel directly, consider donating on Patreon. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.